Welcome to a dialogue about poverty in America. County Health Rankings and Roadmaps is a program of the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute. This program is the result of the contributions of many colleagues and partners in Wisconsin and across the nation, including the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I also would like to acknowledge that the views of speakers outside of the CHR&R program are their own. Hi, my name is Erica Burrows Girardi, and I'm a senior outreach specialist with County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. Today, I'm joined by colleagues who will assist you in your learning experience. And I want to start by introducing you to Tommy Jaime. Hi, Tommy.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Today, I'll be chatting with you in the chat box. And when chatting, please be sure to use the drop-down box and choose Chat Everyone before sending your message. This way, everyone can see your chat. And if you have a question, please be sure to place it in the Q&A box where Joanne will meet you. Joanne is the Collaborative Learning Director with Healthy Places by Design, which is one of our national partners. Hi, Joanne.
Hi, Tommy. Hi, Erica. And hi to our audience across the country. So glad to be here. As Tommy mentioned, everyone, please use the Q&A box. Go ahead and open that up in your Zoom menu, and you'll use the Q&A specifically to pose questions of our wonderful presenters today. You don't have to wait. You can enter your questions as they come up, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A. And if we have time, we will address some questions at the end of the webinar. Before we move on, I want to make sure that I introduce you all to James Lloyd. He is our fabulous technologist who does a ton of behind the scenes magic in producing these webinars. Hi, James.
Oh, hi, Joanne. Thank you. And it's just my pleasure to be able to participate and contribute to these discussions. I find them so valuable. I'll be on hand during the webinar, and if you have a technical issue, you can send the message to the panelists in chat, and we'll do what we can to make your experience a good one. I think I'll turn it back to you, Erica.
Thanks, James. And you know how much we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Today, we have two amazing guests who's going to help us unpack today's topic. I'm very proud to first introduce you to my colleague, Christine Muganda. Christine is the data and analytics team leader here at CHR&R. And Christine, I'm so excited that you're joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. I'm so grateful to be able to join today.
And we are also very fortunate to have David Riemer join us today. David is a senior fellow at the Community Advocates Public Health Policy Institute located in Milwaukee. David, welcome and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It's a pleasure to join you and others for this webinar.
And you can read more about our amazing guest in their bio sketch. And Tommy's going to chat a link to you for you to take a look at their bio sketch and also get their contact information if you want to reach out to them later. You know, the majority of Americans, including myself, and probably the majority of you on today's webinar, know someone who personally cannot make ends meet. Someone like, despite working perhaps even multiple jobs, still struggle to obtain the necessary resources they need to survive. No matter how healthy your county is, disparities in wealth exist. So today we'll be having a conversation in which our goal is to answer these three questions. How do we identify those living in poverty in our communities? Because often the number of people living in poverty is greater than we think. We will also want to explore why is addressing poverty important for communities? And lastly, we'll share potential solutions where you can begin to take action locally and at the federal level. So our goal is for you to leave this webinar with a shared understanding of those structural causes of poverty, but also be prepared to consider solutions that your community can implement to stem the tide. I encourage you to download the slides for today's presentation. It's chock full of information. So Tommy is sharing a link for you right now so you can go ahead and download those slides. County Health Rankings and Roadmaps is committed to health equity and improving health outcomes. Some of you may be new to our program, so I just want to share how we accomplish our goals. we first start by sharing data with you so you can identify who isn't thriving in your community. And then we point to evidence to share what research is showing is working. And then we share guidance to help change makers like yourself take steps of action that actually create change. And then lastly, we offer stories to give you real life inspirational examples of what community change looks like. CHR&R is a comprehensive program. Our goal is to provide you with tools and resources to move you from data to action so that in the end, everyone has the opportunity to thrive, no matter their zip code, color of their skin, age, or any other aspect that makes us unique. Now, to learn more about county health rankings and roadmaps, please be sure to watch our CHR&R 101, and you can watch that on demand. Tommy's going to chat a link to that video, that recording, so you can watch it when you have some spare time to learn more about us. You know, poverty is a complex issue, and I want to be very clear. A 60-minute conversation simply cannot do it justice. Fortunately, both Christine and David have shared numerous resources for you to dive into. So I just want to remind you that tomorrow in your inbox, we will be sending you a resource guide that has all of the resources that you will hear them mention in this webinar, and you can just kind of go through them at your own leisure and just, just unpack them and really get to learn more. But even with the resource guide that we're sharing, there's a lot that's going to be shared today. And so chances are you're going to want to discuss those things. So I want to personally invite you to an interactive discussion group so you can process what you're learning today. And this discussion group will be held right after the webinar. I know several of you have been in these conversations before, so you know they allow you to be face-to-face with other webinar attendees where you can share what you're doing locally as well as ask questions of other participants. We are so pleased to be able to offer these sessions in partnership with Healthy Places by Design, and Joanne will be our lead facilitator. Please watch the chat because Tommy's going to send you details about how you can connect to the discussion group toward the end of the webinar. So, are you ready? Let's dig into today's topic, and I'm going to invite Christine to come back to the mic. And Christine, County Health Rankings and Roadmaps has a measure that's called Children in Poverty. Can you tell us what that measure is capturing?
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I would be happy to start there. The CHR&R measure of children in poverty comes from the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates Program, and that's sometimes referred to as SAPI. And this is a partnership of the US Census Bureau with support from some other federal agencies. The measure itself is the percentage of people under age 18 who are living in poverty.
And what exactly do we mean when we say living in poverty?
Well, the Census Bureau uses a set of income thresholds that vary by family composition to determine who is living in poverty. So if a family's total household income is less than the federal threshold assigned to that family, then that family and every individual in that family is considered to be living in poverty. I think some examples might help this be a little bit more clear for us. So in this example, for a family of 4, the 2021 federal poverty threshold is set to $26,500 of annual income. So that means for the family in this example, with 1 adult and 3 children and an annual household income of $24,000, every member of this family is considered to be living in poverty. This same threshold would apply to a family of 4 with 2 adults and 2 children, for example.
Mm-hmm.
In a different example, for a family of 2, the 2021 poverty threshold is set to $17,420 of annual income. So that means for the family in this example, with 1 adult and 1 child having an annual household income of $18,000 annually, this family would not be considered to be living in poverty.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a poker face. That's troubling. Stark to me. you know, the children in poverty measure has been described by some of our colleagues as a key social and economic factor measure. What insights does this measure reveal about a county's health?
Measuring the percent of children who are experiencing poverty within a county can be so powerful because it captures an assessment of both current and future health risk. Children who are living in poverty are more likely to experience unsafe or unstable housing, have trouble accessing food, or have exposures to environments that could induce asthma or cause injury. And these risks can reflect the current health status in the community.
Yeah, capturing current and future health risk makes sense given that children don't earn their own income. So, if children are living in poverty, this means that parents and caregivers are living in poverty as well.
True. So when we think about the future health of a county, it's really quite sobering, I think, to learn that the child poverty rate is actually 1.5 times higher than that for adults. So what this means is that of all the people living in America, our youngest are being hit hardest by poverty during the years of their life that are really the most formative development.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the implications of what you just said, Christina. So, does that mean that children will struggle to reach their full potential?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, because I want to explore that a little bit more. Like, how does a childhood experience of poverty, like, you know, this is what your childhood was, living in poverty, affect someone's potential to thrive in adulthood?
Erica, I'd like to share this quote that is from Harvard University Center on the Developing Child. Quote, experiences are built into our bodies, and significant adversity early in life can produce biological memories that lead to lifelong impairments in both physical and mental health, end quote. Living in poverty can impact a child's physical environment, like we had just discussed, and might increase exposure to those unsafe environments that could lead to accidents or to other detriments to both physical and emotional health. And of course, those can have repercussions that follow children into adulthood. Poverty can also create a lack of support for academic achievement and create these situations where a child cannot reach their full academic potential due to constant competing unmet needs. And then in the long term, this can impact income opportunities as an adult. But something else that I'd like us to consider is that the experience of poverty also adds a heavy layer of stress for a child and
Yeah.
for their caregivers. And this form of intense stress, which might involve not having basic needs met, like shelter, like food, like preventative health care, having these stresses compounding over time would impact anyone in lasting ways. And for children, these experiences are occurring during really sensitive periods of development for them.
Yeah. Yeah, when we begin to explore poverty in our communities, like I was saying earlier, oftentimes we don't really know the full number. So why is it important to look at disaggregated data? Because often the amount of people who we think is in poverty is not. So tell us why it's important to look at disaggregated data when exploring the children in poverty measure.
This is such an important question. And I think that another example can help us dig into it a little bit better. So to step through this example, I'll use some data from the 2021 rankings. Nationally, 17% of children live in poverty. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs in the county where I lived as a child. 9% of all children are experiencing poverty. And this is well below the national average. So one might say children are less likely to live in poverty in my childhood county as compared to the rest of the nation. Disaggregating this data by race can help us see that in this county, a childhood experience with poverty is likely to depend on who you are. So I identify as Black. So let's go ahead and disaggregate this data by race to see the percentage of Black children living in poverty in this county. 22% of Black children in this county are living in poverty, and that is above the national average. Differing experiences by race create a pattern that extends across our entire nation, regardless of how healthy a county looks overall.
Mm. So basically, it's most likely to show up, that racial difference is likely to show up in most counties. Yeah. And in July, we created a new way of exploring children living in poverty that kind of shows this, and it's the value, it gives values for each state. So I'm going to ask you to tell me a little bit more about this children in poverty data spotlight and how it can be helpful for folks.
Absolutely, I'd be so happy to talk about our spotlight. The Data Spotlight on Children in Poverty is a resource that explores disparities in rates of child poverty in the healthiest counties across our nation. And the Data Spotlight shares context about poverty, and it also talks about how, as a nation, we got here. Users can use this tool to find out what is happening locally in their communities and learn about some solutions from across our program. The Spotlight does this important work of disaggregating the data to unmask underlying patterns of inequity. These community data communicate for us that on the surface level, poverty is the unequal sharing of resources. But this unequal distribution of resources hasn't occurred randomly. Our society has been structured in a way that sorts individuals into positions of varied opportunity and agency, and this organization of power is not at all separate from race. So we'll need to be able to see these inequities first in order to address them. And it can take some intentional thought to present data in a way that starts to uncover these patterns. So the Data Spotlight is intended to enable users to do that, to begin to do that work and of disaggregation, to view the data in their communities in this same format and uncover patterns that are happening locally. I'd like to pause here, and James is going to show us a demo that steps through the Data Spotlight, and then I'll encourage you to visit the Data Spotlight for yourself and explore the data for your own community.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, James, please cue that up because I know everyone is excited to see how it works.
Welcome to the County Health Rankings and Roadmaps Data Spotlight on Children Living in Poverty. We hope this tool helps you look at data in your community and the patterns across your county in new ways. And we wanted to spark conversations about long-term strategies to improve health and well-being for all. This data spotlight focuses on some of the healthiest counties in the 50 states. Despite the many advantages many of these counties enjoy, nearly 1 in 10 children is living in poverty. These data can be difficult to unpack. The success of some increases averages and can hide the experiences of others. The data spotlight starts with the example of Fairfield County in Connecticut. It's among the healthiest counties in the country. The dark blue bar at the top of this chart shows that 12% of children in Fairfield are living in poverty. That's less than the national average of 17%, which is shown on the chart by this vertical line, but it is still significant. The 5 light blue bars below represent different racial groups. You can see that the likelihood of a child experiencing poverty is not random, but is tied to race. The percentages of Black and Hispanic children living in poverty are greater than the overall county value and greater than the national average. The map below invites you to view this pattern across the nation, opening data summaries for the healthiest county in each state. As you explore, you will notice that Black and Hispanic children bear a disproportionate burden of poverty in our country. And this pattern persists even in the healthiest places. Here's something else you may notice as you step through these data. Some counties do not have percentages available for all race groupings. The source we use here for these data are survey estimates. And small numbers can be difficult to estimate with reliability. When you see missing data, we'd like to challenge you to ask questions about why that might be. At first glance, Ozaukee County in Wisconsin may look like a success story, with some race groupings not appearing in these poverty numbers at all. If we contextualize the available data with the knowledge of this place, we will see that one of the reasons why some race groups do not appear in these summaries is because Ozaukee County is over 90% white and only 1% of the residents are Black, with even fewer Asian Pacific Islander or American Native residents. It is important to remember that lack of diversity does not equate to lack of racial inequity. It just makes inequities harder to characterize. As you bring your contextual knowledge about your community, ask yourself who is made most visible by these data and who is not visible. As you continue through the snapshot, the next section allows you to explore the data in the same way for your community. So if I want to see the place where I grew up, I would choose Illinois from the state dropdown. And from the county dropdown, I would choose Will County. A chart populates automatically to show you the different experiences in that county by race. And you can also choose to view these data in a tabular format. You have the option to download either the chart or the table. The next section provides important context explaining the links between poverty and health and the backdrop of racism and discrimination that has contributed to these inequities and continues to hold them in place. The final section is a rich packet of tools that will help you improve conditions in your community. We encourage you to dig into these resources. Thanks for exploring the Children in Poverty Data Spotlight with us. We hope you can find this tool helpful to move data to action in your community.
Wow. Thank you, Christine, for walking us through that. And I know you all are excited to dig into the data spotlight. Don't worry, a link to the spotlight will be on your resource guide, because I know the chat was like blowing up, like, this is fantastic. Okay, so we're gonna make sure you get access to it. But I want to underscore an important note from the demo that you just shared with us. When we group children together and assume that every child within that group is sharing the same experience, we miss a very, very important trends, which only become visible when we disaggregate data.
Right. Yeah, thanks for pulling that point out, Erica. That's right. So no matter how we construct groupings, there is variation within the groups. And this is, of course, true for racial groupings as well. Any way we construct a race group, there will be variation within that group. And aggregated data can mask the variation that's happening within the racial groupings and can effectively erase the experiences of certain subgroups. So I certainly don't want to leave us with the impression that disaggregation into 5 race groups is sufficient, because our shared work as population scientists and as health practitioners is certainly not done. I want to show this capture of the race question that's included on the census. And this question includes 15 category options, which seems like a lot, but it is already a simplification of the reality of America. These categories are then often collapsed into 5 broader categories, an act which applies the assumption, for example, that individuals who checked the boxes labeled Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, or filled in the other Asian option are all sharing the same experience. And this is an assumption that just doesn't bear out. This collapsing of data is often done to address statistical limitations that arise from small numbers, but it obscures the variation that we're talking about, and it should not be considered a final solution. By the same token, dropping data from small populations out of your data set because of statistical limitations is also very deeply problematic.
Right.
So let's use the data spotlight to start this conversation, that there are disparities in the experience of poverty and that variation is not random, but it is tied to race. And then let's use this conversation to challenge our field to invest intentionally and responsibly in the collection and the reporting of data for underrepresented groups. And then from there, together, we can move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christina. And I appreciate you sticking around. If we have time for questions, I'm certain that there will be some folks that want to reach out to you and ask you a question. So I appreciate you
Sounds
laying
great,
that
Erica. Thanks.
Yeah, and you laid that foundation for us. And This is a reminder that the resources that both Christine and David will be sharing with us today are included in your resource guide. And so now I want to invite David back to the mic as we will be able begin to explore what we can do as public health advocates to reduce poverty. So welcome back, David.
Good to be back.
I want to just kind of dig into a question that's probably circling on people's minds, because you once made the case that the United States has more unemployed workers than available jobs. In other words, there's a job shortage. But the United States seems to be experiencing a boom in job opportunities right now. And in many cases, some people say, well, it's actually a worker shortage because we have an abundance of job openings. So share with us what the data tells us, and if some employers are having a tough time filling their job vacancies, why is that happening?
Well, the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, make it very clear that there's almost always a job shortage in the United States. When Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Hopkins and others during the New Deal got down to work in 1933, they had no trouble recognizing the giant job shortage they faced, even though official data were scanty. Today, we have very solid survey data from BLS on both the number of job seekers and the number of job openings. For decades, BLS has produced data on different measures of who's unemployed. And then beginning at the very end of 2000, BLS started to collect and report data on job openings. And when you compare job seekers, people who want work with various degrees of intensity, against job openings, most of the time, the data make very clear that there are far more Americans who want a job or extra hours of work, shown respectively by the black, green, purple, and red lines, than there are jobs available, which is shown in the blue line. So a job shortage doesn't always occur, but it's the norm. Sometimes it's modest, often it's big. On occasion, the job shortage is quite huge. During the last 20 months, from January of 2020 through August of 2021, the pattern went through extremes. So in the winter and spring of 2020, the job shortage was just gigantic. Today, it remains quite big, using some of the definitions of the unemployed. BLS for the last several months shows that when you compare the narrow definition, that's the official measure of the unemployed, versus the number of job openings, that they're roughly the same. But the bottom line is that most of the time, we have a job shortage, more adults who want to work than there are jobs available, shown towards the end of the slide by the black and green lines being greater than the red line. So what appears as a worker shortage is really a situation in which an ample number of adults who want to work, some seeking it with great intensity, face obstacles that clog or jam up their relationship with job openings. And I won't spend too much time identifying what some of those things are that clog the labor market, but just to name a few: lack of transportation, lack of childcare, fear of losing health insurance, and more we're hearing about employers' hesitancy to raise wages substantially enough to attract people to go and work for them. In some of my notes, there's a greater listing of what those obstacles are.
And I know COVID, the pandemic, also had some influence. Can you name a couple of factors in which the pandemic may have played a role in the job shortage?
Well, one factor was that it obviously caused some workers, potential workers, to be afraid of going to work. They didn't want to get infected from other workers or customers. Another factor was that since COVID caused a lot of daycare centers and schools to shut down, a lot of the parents, potentially working parents of those children, were not able to leave their children, couldn't find daycare for them, couldn't take them to school, were responsible as parents for being with them 24/7. Well, they couldn't both do that and also take a job. So those are just some of the COVID specific obstacles that hopefully will go away, leaving the sort of underlying larger set of obstacles that really have nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah. So what then would you say is the primary cause of poverty in the United States?
Well, one I've already mentioned, unemployment, underemployment that are caused by the labor market's typical shortage of jobs. And that is combined with low wages that very large numbers of Americans have to deal with. If you look at the table, BLS data for 2021 showed that the usual weekly earnings of 10% of the population were $502 a week. So if you multiply that by 52 weeks, you end up with $26,104. That's below the poverty line for a family of four that Christine mentioned earlier.
Right.
The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a pretty reputable think tank in Washington, estimated that 19% of jobs paid below poverty wages. So that's the biggest cause. Excuse me. Just not enough jobs, wages too low. Another factor is that for people who aren't, excuse me, in the labor market due to a disability or due to retirement, their minimum benefit is often insufficient to get them out of poverty.
Right. Right. I want to remind our audience that Tommy has chatted the link to the slides. Feel free to bring up those slides. I know that some of the tables are hard to read on the screen. So Tommy, if you would just chat that out one more time so folks can look at, have their own copy of the slides as we go through this. David, I want to turn back to you. Like, why is correcting the labor market shortcomings, like reducing unemployment and greatly reducing poverty, so important to society? Like, you know, does poverty affect more, impact more than just those who are poor? If so, how?
Well, poverty has a whole series of pretty harmful consequences for the poor themselves, and that's perhaps our primary concern. Poverty, as we measure it in this country, basically means you don't have a lot of money. Because of that, you often can't afford enough food, enough nutritious food. Malnutrition can result from that. It means you have difficulty staying in a home, keeping up with the rent, paying the mortgage, creates a risk of homelessness or eviction or foreclosure. If you don't have enough money, you can't pay the utility bills. So you risk in the winter not having enough heat, or in the summer having too much heat, not because you can't afford air conditioning. That leads to, you know, dangerous, unhealthy exposure. And then a final thing that we're learning a lot more about, and Christine talked about it, poverty causes stress, and stress results in what they call dysregulation of the endocrine system and the immune system. And that triggers a whole bunch of health problems, physical health problems, mental health problems, various risks that lead to premature death, that lead to all kinds of health crises and problems for people. So that's the effect of poverty on the poor themselves, just a sort of a thumbnail sketch of it. There are also terrible consequences for society. The poor are just not a vague concept. They are our parents, our children, our aunts, our uncles, our relatives, our friends, people in our religious communities. When they get sick, when they die, those are losses to us as the non-poor. We also lose workers in the economy. If you're unemployed, if you're poor and can't get to a job because you don't have a car, you don't have daycare, then that means an employer and the economy in general lose productive workers. And then, of course, being poor means you pay less in taxes. There's a loss of revenue to society, and we have to choose either between cutting services we care about, education, libraries, parks, and so forth, or having those things, but then having the rest of us, the non-poor, paying higher taxes than we should. And then finally, the last point on this slide, because the poor suffer a higher level of health problems, they also generate pretty substantial healthcare costs.
Yeah.
But because they're poor, very often they can't pay their share of those costs. So those costs are shifted to us in programs like Medicaid, or they are shifted to us in terms of uncompensated care. So that means that we, the rest of us, bear a disproportionate share of the healthcare costs of the poor. That means our income shrinks, our ability to have the things that we would normally get is curtailed. the taxes that we pay are higher.
Yeah. And if you, for all of you advocates out there, I know you are wanting to take action with poverty. Here are your talking points. When you go to talk to decision makers about why it's so important to address poverty, you have your talking points laid out so nicely for you. So thank you, David, for doing that. What will it take to dramatically reduce unemployment and poverty in the United States?
What's remarkable is that it's actually pretty simple. It requires putting together a work-based policy package. If you do that right, if you have the right components in it and you implement it properly, you can bring about just dramatic reductions in poverty. Experimental studies, such as the New Hope project that took place in Milwaukee in the 1990s, shows the general direction that we should be going with this policy package. Following on that, at least 4 very sophisticated independent analyses carried out by the Urban Institute using its highly regarded trim-free microsimulation methodology confirm that a very large share of America's unemployed can move into wage-paying jobs, and that poverty in the United States can be slashed by 50, 60, 70, up to 80% if, this is the key, if the federal government implements a comprehensive work-based policy package. And when I talk about reducing poverty, I'm talking here about the measuring that impact using the more credible supplemental poverty measure or SPM. So if you look at these 2 slides, you can see in gray the baseline poverty in the United States in 2010 prior to the impact of this simulated policy package. The black and the blue bars show how much poverty is reduced after this policy package is put in place. And as you can see, the reductions are dramatic. They apply to every age group. That's the chart on the left. And they apply not just to everybody, but to the white population, the Black population, the Hispanic population, and to other groups. So it can be done.
Mm-hmm. And what exactly are those components of a policy package that would dramatically reduce poverty in America?
Well, I believe that there are, and this isn't just belief, this is based on all these studies that have been done. There are 5 essential components. The first is we need to offer unemployed and underemployed individuals easy access to wage-paying, useful, subsidized jobs, often called transitional jobs, drawing on the experience of what they did in the CCC and the WPA during the Great Depression, and also drawing on more recent subsidized jobs programs. So first thing we need to do is make work easily available. Secondly, we need to do 2 things to make work pay. First of all, we need to raise the minimum wage up to at least 10, ideally $12 or $15 an hour. And then, because that alone won't be enough, we need to have an even broader and bigger set of earning supplements. The earned income tax credit needs to be expanded, particularly for so-called childless adults. I say so-called because many of them do have children, but they don't necessarily meet the test of a dependent child. And we also should be expanding the child tax credit to many more children, increase the amount, and pay it periodically. If we do these 2 things, as well as measures like expanding paid leave, we can make work pay. And then we need to recognize that some of the poor are not in the labor market. They have a disability, they qualify for disability benefits. They've retired after working often for decades, and they've retired almost always on Social Security, but their minimum benefit is below the poverty line. We need to raise that. And then the final component in this policy package is we need to recognize that other supports are needed. A lot of job seekers and workers need affordable childcare. So we need to take care of that. We need to get everybody health insurance. But if you put this package together, as we can see on this next slide, you not only have impacts on dramatically reducing poverty, but we have positive health impacts.
Yeah, one of the questions that I know is circling on in everyone's mind is how do we know that if we address poverty with these policies that health will improve?
Well, it used to be something that made common sense, but I think now we have a growing body of evidence that when we reduce poverty by reducing unemployment and raising incomes, particularly earnings-based incomes, we see improvements in health. This slide just shows one example from a very steady stream of research and analysis that document that relatively small reductions in poverty produce small gains in health outcomes. The question remains, however, and this hasn't been researched yet, what would a large, a very dramatic reduction in unemployment and poverty along the lines of what I just described, what would that do to improve health outcomes? And as of today, we don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. So, earlier in your intro slide, when we were transitioning from Christine to you, you had this John Snow question. So I want to kind of go back to that. Like, what is the John Snow question you would pose? Well, first of all, who was John Snow?
Right.
And why is he relevant to what you're sharing with us today?
Well, as I'm sure many viewers will know, John Snow was a very eminent English anesthesiologist who practiced in London in the 1850s. And when an outbreak of cholera occurred in Soho, Dr. Snow pinpointed the homes of its victims on a map of Soho, creating what some people have called a ghost map. And if you look in the middle of the map, the black dots get thicker and thicker and thicker. And Dr. Snow realized that that was the heart of the problem. And he ended up focusing on Broad Street in the middle of London and a particular water pump that was producing water that lots of people in that area were drinking. So Snow did something quite unique. He went not to the hospital where he worked or to the healthcare providers at the time. He went to the people that were in control of the pump. And he basically ordered them, remove the pump handle. They did. This is a report of his doing that from 2001. And in connection with that, the cholera epidemic began to wane and go away. So London honored him and honored eventually the work that resulted, which was the creation in London of a system of delivering pure water and then removing waste by naming a pub after him, the John Snow. And on that pub, they affixed a blue plaque that, among other things, honors him as the father of epidemiology. So what does Dr. Snow's story have to do with the John Snow question, which I actually think boils down to two questions. The first question is that he sort of leaves us with is, what are the policy reforms entirely outside of the current health system? For Dr. Snow and his era was working outside the healthcare system that he was caught up in. What reforms that are entirely outside of the current health system, in fact, even outside of the public health system, would have the greatest impact on improving population health? And the second question is, if in fact a policy package of reforms that's outside of the healthcare system would in fact do the most to improve population health, isn't it the obligation of doctors and other public health experts to make the pursuit of that specific anti-poverty policy package their top priority, just as Dr. Snow made safe water and a good sewage system his top priority for improving population health?
So what exactly would you say doctors and other health experts should do? Like if Dr. Snow were alive today, by the way, I do remember him now that you jogged my memory, but if he were alive today and, was caught up on the latest research, how would he advise today's doctors and health experts to proceed?
Well, Dr. Snow was famous in his time for telling what he believed, whether it was popular to say it or not. So I believe that he would speak to the medical and the public health community and say some things that would be challenging. His starting point would be that we already know that economic and social factors are the primary determinants of health, as this chart and others like it show. We also already know that unemployment and poverty loom very large among those determinants. And we're beginning to understand finally, bit by bit, how reducing unemployment and poverty in modest ways can improve health in modest ways. Mm-hmm. What we don't know, and this is would be his starting point, what we don't know, what we lack is detailed, solid, indisputable evidence as to whether and in what ways and how much a comprehensive federal policy package that dramatically reverses unemployment and poverty will also greatly improve America's population health outcomes. So if he were alive today, I think that Dr. Snow would basically say three things. First of all, I think he would insist that we have rigorous scientific studies using classic random assignment methods, adhering, as we need to adhere to very rigid ethical requirements, but that we carry out these studies comprehensively and quickly to try to determine which of the federal policy packages that dramatically reduce unemployment and poverty, and there are different ways of putting those packages together, but which of them has the greatest positive impact on health outcomes. The second thing Snow, I believe, would say is, with that information, that it's the obligation of today's doctors and health experts to continuously and energetically disseminate their findings, including the information about what it costs. And finally, and this is the most important thing, Snow would recommend, in the same way that he went to the people that controlled the pump handle on Broad Street, he would say that today's doctors and health experts need to dedicate themselves to persuading the most relevant government, the federal government, to enact the optimal anti-poverty policy package, the one that does the most, not only to reduce unemployment and poverty at an acceptable cost, but also the one that does the most to improve US population health outcomes.
Thank you so much, David. I certainly appreciate what you and Christine have shared with our audience today. After listening to David and Christine, I've come to the conclusion that we all have a role to play in reducing poverty in our community. So what's your first step? Well, you want to start with the data, and no doubt many of you wondering how you can explore the data tool that Christine introduced earlier. So we do have a link for it in the resource guide, and I want you to promise me you'll check that out. But the other step is to look at those potential solutions that David shared. And again, you have the talking points right there in your the copy, a PDF of the slides of how you can share this information with decision makers. And I actually pulled some stuff from our What Works for Health menu of evidence-rated strategies, and I just simply put in the keyword poverty, and here are some strategies that I was able to lift from What Works for Health. So if you are beginning to think about how you and your partners can take action locally against poverty, start with the data and then start looking at some of these strategies. And again, you've got your talking points, so you all ready to go. So anyway, James, I'm going to ask that you launch a very quick poll. I am just curious how much you all have learned from today's webinar. And so if you would just answer these questions, this is an anonymous poll, by the way. My understanding about poverty in America has what? And just let us know how that, what your level of knowledge in poverty is right now. So thank you for that. Joanne, we have time for 2 questions only, because I know we want to get ready for that discussion group. And James, I'm going to tell you, go ahead and close that poll. Most people have already responded. So thank you for that. And let me just turn it over to Joanne to lift up some questions.
Thanks, Erica. Yep. So the Q&A box has been very, very busy, and I'm just going to beg forgiveness to our audience that I tried to pull the most relevant questions. I do want to make a pitch, though. Some folks had very specific questions relevant to their work, and we want to encourage that because it shows that you're thinking about implementation. If we didn't get to your question, please reach out, contact CHR&R, and we will we will provide you with one-on-one support. So for Christine, there was a lot of folks who were just kind of surprised at the poverty threshold figures, too low, even people above the threshold live in poverty. Can you just provide a commentary on that?
Sure, I can talk kind of generally about how those numbers are calculated. The exact details are a little bit difficult to unpack, so I would direct you to the HHS website. But essentially, the calculation starts with consideration of pre-tax income, and the intent is for these poverty guidelines to reflect large expected expenses like food, and to be adjusted annually in a reflection of inflation and increasing costs. Ultimately, they are being used to determine qualifications for some federal programs. So that's how they're operationalized in the real world.
Thanks so much. I know it's hard to give super concise answers with such complex questions. If we have time, Erica, I do want to ask David to rejoin us. David, you got a lot of great positive comments about that slide that showed what you proposed, the 5 points to be included in the policy package to reduce poverty by 50% plus. And if you could just say one major obstacle for implementing that package, the audience would love to know that.
Well, I would say one major obstacle that certainly pertains to this group is just so many people aren't aware of the fact that these studies have been carried out, one in Wisconsin, one related to New York City, one related to children nationally, and then finally one related to the whole country, that just show over and over again, using this very independent, sophisticated system, that if you do these 5 policies and you put them together in the right way, that you just have these dramatic effects. That what was interesting about these studies, and if people go to them, you can see the data. Each one of these alone does a lot, but usually in the low single digits. It reduces poverty by 10% or 15% or whatever. When you combine them, when you have them reinforce each other, you begin to see these dramatic effects of reducing poverty by more than half. And I would say that, frankly, we can get close to 80% or 90%. We didn't test, for example, the impact of paid leave or stronger collective bargaining or a number of other things. So I think that just knowing that it can be done, that it's not impossible, that it's pretty easy to do technically, would, I think, be one big step to get that word out.
Great. Thank you so much. I know we're running short of time, Erica, so I'm going to toss it back to you.
All right. So thank you all so much. I want to actually know how you, what you thought about this presentation. I keep saying presentation, it was actually a webinar. It was actually a conversation, that's what it was. So, but anyway, we know, so those of you who are with us each month, you know how much we love to hear from you. So Tommy's chatting a link to a short survey, and I'm going to ask that you click on the link and then complete the survey after the webinar, because your feedback is very important to us. It is the primary way that we're able to determine which topics we will bring to you on a monthly basis. So please do share that, share your thoughts about today's webinar. Now, one of the ways that we can take action against poverty is to take an active role in civic opportunities in our local communities. We can volunteer, we can exercise our rights to participate in a democratic process by voting, and we can participate in other activities that promote the public good. The question is, do participating in any of these activities actually influence our health? Well, we will explore this question and more next month on October 16th with our guests, Dawn Hunter and Kim Irwin. So please be sure to join us, and you can register for that webinar today by going to our website. Make sure you follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We have a presence on both of those social media outlets. And also be sure to sign up for our newsletter. This is the best way that you can find out about our upcoming webinars and our latest tools and resources. And now for what you all have been waiting for as we wrap up today's webinar, we want again to invite you to join us afterward to further explore these topics and engage in conversation with fellow audience members. Again, these conversations give you the opportunity to be face-to-face with other webinar attendees, share what you're doing locally, and ask questions of other participants. As far as I know, David and Christine are joining us during the discussion group. So please go ahead and hop on over there. Tommy is chatting out a link to the discussion group now. When you click on that link, you'll be asked a couple of questions and then you will receive another link to connect to the live session. And I will be there, of course. So I look forward to seeing you. I want to thank my colleague, Christine Muganda and David Riemer for sharing their wisdom with us today. Thank you to my colleagues who help produce our webinars on a monthly basis. And thank you to all of you for taking an hour out of your month, each month, to spend it with us, and for all the work that you do locally to promote equity in your communities. I look forward to seeing you in the discussion group and look forward to seeing you next month. Have a good afternoon.